You're listening to the Music Tech Teacher Podcast, Episode 1. Welcome to the Music Tech Teacher Podcast. Music tech tips, lesson ideas, advice, news, and interviews, especially for music teachers. Brought to you by midnightmusic.com.au. Welcome to the Music Tech Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Wardrobe from midnightmusic.com.au, and thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really excited to be recording the first official episode of the podcast today, and it's all about podcasts themselves. One of the reasons for starting this podcast is that podcasts have actually been my biggest source of inspiration and education for around 8 years or so, and I really wanted to create one that helped other people in the same way that they've helped me. So why are they so good? Well, if you're not sure what a podcast is, and I know many of you aren't, I've asked this question a lot in workshops, and I get a range of blank looks to maybe a little familiarity with what the podcast is, but, not a true understanding. And then there's a handful of people who are already listening to them, and I think they're becoming a lot more mainstream lately. So why are they so good? Well, it's kind of like radio on demand. So it's anytime listening. You can listen to a podcast episode starting in your car on the way to work, and then even if you don't get through the whole episode, you can listen to it later on. So it's a little bit like watching television shows on Netflix, for instance. You get a choice of when you're going to listen to them, day or night, or whenever it is that suits you. The thing that I love about podcasts, and this is even more so than a visual medium like TV shows or videos, is that you can listen or consume them while you're actually doing something else. So this is a great way to make some tedious activities fun. I listen to podcasts a lot when I'm cleaning or cooking, perhaps. I listen to them when I go for a run, when I have a shower. I listen to them while I'm driving, painting the fence recently. I got through a whole stack of episodes from a particular podcast just while painting the fence at home. Another great thing about podcasts is that they cover really niche topics. So pretty much anything that you can think of that you might be interested in yourself, whether it's craft or music related things, or things like gardening and fitness and religion, I can honestly say that there would definitely be a podcast out there for almost any of those things, and you can find them and listen to other people talk about the thing that you're passionate about and learn more about it. One of the great things is that podcasts are free, so you can just get stuck into something, and it is really truly like waiting for a radio episode to come out each week. Different podcasts publish on different schedules, but a lot of the ones I listen to are weekly podcasts, so I know that every Wednesday I'm going to get a new episode from a specific one, and I really look forward to that after a while. The content actually comes to you. So once you subscribe, and you can do that just on your smartphone. I have an iPhone. You don't need to have an iPhone to do it, though. You can have an Android device. Basically, you can subscribe to a podcast in a podcasting app, and the episodes will just pop up in there when they're next available. And for this reason, it's really useful because podcasts are with me all the time. So I do find that when I've got downtime or I'm doing something a little bit tedious, it's the first thing that I turn to and turn on my phone and have a listen to something. So over the years, and I think I mentioned earlier that I started in around maybe 2009 or so listening to podcasts, and I don't really remember how I came across podcasts in general, where I heard the term or found out what they were, because they weren't as common as they are now back then. So I know that one of my earliest ones that I was listening to was a business marketing type podcast called Small Business Big Marketing, which I think is still going today. And that led me to some other business related podcasts, which I listened to at the time and have listened to over the years as well. There was a few education podcasts around. I started thinking, well, maybe there's some education-based ones, because I would love to learn about what other teachers are doing in the classroom, and didn't have to be music-related necessarily, but I was particularly interested in learning about the way teachers were using technology. I stumbled across one which was actually music related and technology related, which was a teacher named Jim Frankel in the States. And he's moved on to different things now, but at the time he was teaching and presenting at conferences. So he would share what he was doing and often share conference presentations. So I found that really useful and interesting. I couldn't attend the conference myself, but I could hear his presentation in the podcast episode. There was another one that I found really early on called The Clever Sheep, which was run by a teacher, Rod Lucia, who I think is from Canada. That one was fantastic and taught me so much about technology in my early days of using it myself and in training teachers how to use it as well. I learnt a lot about just websites to use, concepts of things like using something like Dropbox, cloud computing, all of those things I learnt really from that podcast. And he had, short episodes, 10 minutes or less, and you could just take a little bite-sized bit of information. I would be listening while I'm driving, and I would get home and follow up with the links that he had mentioned when I got back to my laptop, which was fantastic. There were some other ones that I was listening to which were quite short like that as well. One called Grammar Girl, I think that one is also still going, which teaches you about, a word or usage of words in the English language, which was also really interesting. So my own podcast list, it really fluctuates over time. I subscribe to some and then, maybe I find I'm not listening to one, so I'll unsubscribe, but then I'll bring in some new ones all the time. So it's an ever-changing list over time. My current favourites, I'll mention a few of them because every time I start going on about podcasts and how fantastic they are, people always want to know what it is that I actually listen to. So I'll share some of the ones that I listen to regularly at the moment. And of course, this might change over time. But some of my favourites now, and these fall into a few different categories. They're not all education or music education or technology related. I have roughly three categories of podcasts that I listen to. The first category are ones which are kind of like story-based or news reporting-based ones, but they present information which I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to find out about, but the way that these podcasts present it is so fascinating and interesting that it really makes you want to learn about something that you may not know about. So some of these favourites include there's one called Radio Lab, the TED Radio Hour, which is sort of a compilation of different TED Talks into one. There's roughly an hour radio show. There's another one called Note to Self, which is about the use of technology in the current day and age and how we can best use it in our lives without it overtaking everything. Another favourite called Reply All, and a new one called Heavyweight, and there's been a really well-known one which has been very popular called Serial, and that's been the story of a court case which has been reopened and looked into, and it was all about that particular court case. In the business arena, I listened to a few different ones there, and they include things like one called How I Built This, which is about following companies from their very start to where they are now. And this is, about really big, well-known companies and the founders telling you how they got started and the difficulties that they had. A couple of other ones. Amy Porterfield has a great podcast about marketing, which I love to listen to. There's the Flipped Lifestyle podcast with friends of mine, Shane and Jocelyn Sams, and who are educators who now make a living online. So if you're interested in learning about that, definitely check theirs out. And another one called Pro Blogger, which is all about making a business out of your blog or website. In the education space, this is an interesting one. Over the years, I've listened to a few different ones. And one of the main problems, I think, with the education-based podcasts is that most of them are presented by teachers. And of course, teachers get really busy, so they tend to be a little bit more sporadic than some of the other podcasts I listen to. And sometimes there'll be a few weeks or months even when there's no episode released, because I'm guessing the teacher is super busy at school and just does not have time to record one, which I totally get. But, over time, hopefully these will start to build and there will be more regular podcasts in the education space. Because as I said, I really love hearing about what other teachers are doing. So at the moment, in this area, I'm listening to one called Tech Educator. There's another one called Smart Tech. And there's a new one by a couple of teachers that I have had contact with online in the past few years, I guess. That one's called Music Education and Technology Podcast. And look, I'm going to link to all of these in the show notes. Now, show notes which accompany a podcast are going to be on my website. There will be a page with a list of all the links that I'm mentioning, the podcasts that I'm mentioning today, where you can follow up this. So if you are actually listening to this while driving, don't worry. They'll all be there listed for you, and you can follow up later on and check some of these out yourself. I really hope you do check out some of those. I'm going to give you a small language warning for some of them. Do check that whether they're explicit or not. Some of them do include some swearing. Not a lot of them, but occasionally some of the ones that I listen to do. So if you are choosing to listen with family or students around, just beware and check the rating for each one. And I really do hope that you find something that you like and will start to love. As I said, it's something that I've been really, I really do look forward to each week when podcast episodes are released. So in terms of plans for this podcast, for the Music Tech Teacher podcast, I'm planning on releasing weekly episodes, and the episodes I'm going to focus on really doing mini training sessions. There will be information that I really hope will be useful for you to try out in your classroom to do with music technology. So I'll be looking at, one aspect of music technology. So it might be a particular software program or a sort of a concept or lesson idea that you can implement. It might be new apps that I've discovered and think that might be useful for you to try out. I'm also going to include a number of interviews with people that I know who don't know. I haven't actually asked them yet, but I'm sure they'll be on the show. Interviews with teachers that I know who are great at using technology in the music classroom or in the music rehearsal room. I'll be asking people to come on and chat to me about what they do, and hopefully that will help some other people as well. So a couple of action steps. I'm going to give action steps where I can at the end of each episode. A couple of action steps for this episode. I'd love it if you subscribe to this podcast. And you can do that through iTunes. You don't have to have an iPhone to do that. You can have an Android device. But if you go into the iTunes app, you can search for this podcast, Music Tech Teacher Podcast, and hit the subscribe button. And that just means you'll have episodes delivered automatically to your device each week when episodes come out. While you're there in the podcast app, you might like to search for some other podcasts. So type in a couple of words maybe about something you're interested in. So knitting, for instance, or puppies, and just to see what pops up. You can have a listen to a couple of episodes before you commit to subscribing, although it doesn't really matter if you do hit the subscribe button anyway, since they're free. And if at any time you decide, no, you don't really like that one, you can just unsubscribe at that time. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll look forward to connecting with you next week. The Music Tech Teacher podcast is hosted by me, Katie Wardrobe. You can find more information and links from today's episode at midnightmusic.com.au/1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.